They say betrayal hurts most when it comes from family, but nothing prepared me for the day my only daughter looked me straight in the eye and told me I was no longer welcome in my own home. She didn't just take my Lake Harmony villa. She handed it over to her husband's parents as if 30 years of sacrifice meant nothing. I smiled, nodded, and walked away, but not in defeat. Behind that quiet retreat was a storm she could never see coming. While Emily believed she had won, I was setting into motion a plan that would turn her triumph into a nightmare she'd never forget. And when justice finally arrived, it wouldn't just knock. It would shatter the very doors she thought she'd locked me out of. The late afternoon sun dipped low as Margaret Wilson steered her silver sedan along the winding mountain road toward Lake Harmony. At 65, she found these drives more exhausting than she used to, but the reward waiting at the end, a quiet weekend in her villa, was worth every mile. The air was crisp. Pine trees lined the road, and the thought of sipping tea on her terrace made her shoulders relax. The Lake Harmony villa had been her sanctuary for years, a place she and her late husband built with love, brick by brick, memory by memory. As she turned into the long driveway, the familiar white shutters of the villa came into view. But something felt off. A faint curl of smoke rose from the chimney, and the faint hum of music drifted in the air. Margaret frowned. She hadn't told anyone she'd be here this weekend. Her heartbeat picked up as she parked and stepped out, the crunch of gravel under her sensible flats echoing in the still air. Through the large glass doors leading to the terrace, she froze. There, lounging as if they belonged, were Emily and David. Her daughter was draped in a cream bathrobe, her hair perfectly set, sipping coffee as if she were in a luxury resort. David, in a matching robe, leaned back in the deck chair beside her, scrolling through his phone. For a moment, Margaret's mind couldn't process what she was seeing. She had expected solitude, maybe even a wave of nostalgia from memories of her late husband. Instead, she was staring at her only child occupying the home without notice, without permission. Emily noticed her first. A flicker of surprise crossed her face before it was quickly replaced by an expression Margaret had never seen before. Cold, sharp, dismissive. "Mom," Emily said flatly, setting down her coffee cup, "what are you doing here?" Margaret blinked, still trying to gather herself. "What am I doing here? Emily, this is my house. I came for the weekend. I didn't realize." She gestured vaguely toward the terrace. David shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable but saying nothing. Emily's tone hardened. "Well, we have plans. David and I are here for a private weekend. It's inconvenient for you to be here right now." Margaret's breath caught. "Inconvenient? Emily, I drove 3 hours to get here. This is my home. Emily stood, tying her robe tighter as if bracing herself. "Mom, please, don't make this more awkward than it needs to be. We're already settled in. You can come back another time." Her voice had the practiced smoothness of someone who'd rehearsed this conversation in her head. A deep ache settled in Margaret's chest. She had heard sharp words from Emily before. Teenage arguments, misunderstandings. But never this icy dismissal. "Emily, your father and I built this place. Every piece of furniture, every tile, we chose together. It's—" She trailed off, her voice breaking. Emily sighed impatiently. "I know, Mom, but things change. You don't even come here that often. David and I will take good care of it. You should focus on yourself." The words stung more than Margaret could have imagined. Focus on herself? Wasn't this villa a part of herself? It was the very place she came to remember her husband, to feel close to him. David finally spoke, his tone quiet but firm. "Maybe it's best if we have the weekend, Margaret. We can talk about this later." Margaret's grip on her purse tightened. She could feel her pulse in her temples, a mixture of hurt and disbelief swirling inside her. She wanted to shout, to demand they pack their bags and leave immediately. But something in Emily's expression stopped her, a smug certainty. As if she believed Margaret would simply back down, Margaret drew in a slow breath, forcing her voice to stay steady. "I see. Well, I wouldn't want to intrude on your plans. The words tasted bitter, each syllable heavy. Emily nodded quickly, relieved. Thank you, Mom. We'll make it up to you. I promise. Margaret gave a small, tight smile, though her chest felt hollow. She turned and walked back to her car, each step echoing with the weight of decades of sacrifice, college tuition, wedding expenses, endless support, now met with cold dismissal. As she slid behind the wheel, she cast one last glance toward the terrace. Emily was already turning back toward David, resuming their conversation as if Margaret had never been there. The engine started with a low hum, and Margaret began the slow descent down the driveway. Outside, the lake shimmered in the golden light, utterly indifferent to the storm now brewing inside her heart. She had come here seeking peace, but left with a wound she hadn't anticipated. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as she merged onto the main road. For now, she would leave. For now, she would say nothing. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The drive back to San Francisco felt longer than usual. Margaret barely noticed the breathtaking mountain views or the fading streaks of sunset in the rearview mirror. Her mind was a storm of disbelief. The conversation on the terrace replayed in her head over and over, each time cutting deeper. When she finally arrived home, the house felt colder than usual. She set her purse down on the entryway table, the sound of her keys hitting the wood, echoing in the silence. She made herself a cup of tea, hoping the warmth might settle her restless thoughts. Just as she settled into her armchair, her phone rang. Emily's name lit up the screen. For a brief moment, Margaret thought perhaps her daughter had come to her senses, maybe even to apologize. She answered, her voice soft. Hello, Emily? The reply was brisk, businesslike. Mom, I just wanted to let you know. David and I have decided that the villa will officially be for his parents now. It just makes more sense. They'll be moving in soon. Margaret sat frozen, her teacup halfway to her lips. What do you mean, for his parents? Emily, that's my home. Emily's voice was calm but laced with impatience. Mom, you hardly use it anymore. You're always in the city. You're retired now. You don't need such a big place. It's better for everyone if we give it to people who can actually live there. The words hit harder than Margaret expected. Not only was Emily making decisions about her property, she was framing it as an act of practicality, almost as if she were doing Margaret a favor. Emily, Margaret said slowly, trying to steady her voice. Your father and I built that villa with decades of hard work. It's not just a property. It's part of our family history. There was a pause, and then Emily's voice came back, sharper now. Mom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. You're older now. You should be focusing on comfort, not clinging to some big empty house. Older? Comfort. The words wrapped around Margaret like a tightening band. For a moment, she couldn't find her voice. I see, she finally managed. And you've decided this without asking me? It's not about asking, Mom, Emily said with a sigh, as though explaining something obvious to a child. It's about doing what's right. You'll thank me later. The call ended soon after, with Emily promising to handle everything. Margaret sat in silence, the phone still in her hand. A second wave of shock washed over her, heavier than the first. It wasn't just the villa. It was the realization that her daughter saw her as someone to be managed, a problem to be solved, rather than a mother to be respected. Her gaze drifted to the mantel, where family photographs lined the shelf. One in particular caught her eye. Emily at her college graduation, grinning broadly as Margaret held her diploma for the camera. 4 years of tuition, housing, and expenses, every cent paid without hesitation. Another photo showed Emily in a white gown, David at her side, their wedding reception in full swing. Margaret remembered the way Emily had called her in tears, saying they'd gone over budget. Margaret had written a check without a second thought. Then there was the SUV parked in Emily's driveway. 8 months after the wedding, David's car had broken down. Emily had called, her voice urgent, saying they needed something safe and reliable. Margaret had bought them a brand new vehicle, smiling when she handed over the keys. Every memory was a reminder of sacrifice, of unconditional giving. And now, here she was, being told she was too old, too unnecessary, too irrelevant to keep what she had built. For a moment, anger bubbled up, sharp and hot. She could call Emily back right now. She could shout. She could demand her daughter stop whatever she was planning. But then, slowly, Margaret's breathing steadied. She set the phone down on the table. Shouting wouldn't change Emily's mind. Confrontation wouldn't solve this. Emily believed she had the upper hand. She believed Margaret would just accept whatever she decided. A different thought took root in Margaret's mind, quiet but firm. Let her think that. She leaned back in her chair, the faintest glimmer of resolve forming beneath the layers of hurt. There would be no angry phone calls, no desperate pleas. Instead, Margaret would watch. She would wait. And when the time came, she would act, not out of rage, but with the precision of someone who had learned patience over a lifetime. Her tea had grown cold, but she didn't notice. In her mind, the first threads of a plan were beginning to take shape. For now, she would remain silent. But silence, Margaret knew, could be powerful. The next morning, Margaret sat at her kitchen table, her coffee untouched. The bitterness in the cup mirrored the bitterness she felt inside. Emily's words from the night before still echoed in her head, each sentence replaying like a sharp blade cutting deeper into her thoughts. She didn't sleep much that night. Instead, she paced the floor, going over every possible reaction. She could call Emily again, confront her in person, even show up at the villa to stake her claim. But all those options felt like walking into a trap Emily had already set. No, this needed to be handled differently, quietly. By mid-morning, Margaret had made her decision. She reached for her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. Jonathan Lee, her longtime family lawyer. Jonathan had been there for every major legal step in her life, from the purchase of the villa to the execution of her late husband's will. If there was anyone who could help her now, it was him. "Margaret," Jonathan's warm, professional voice answered after just 2 rings. "It's been too long. What can I do for you?" Margaret hesitated for just a moment, glancing toward the photographs on the mantel. "Jonathan, I need to talk to you about protecting some property. It's urgent." Within an hour, she was seated in Jonathan's well-appointed office in downtown San Francisco. His walls were lined with bookshelves, full of thick legal volumes and framed certificates of his accomplishments. He greeted her with his usual professionalism, but as soon as he saw the tension in her face, his tone shifted to concern. They sat across from each other at the polished oak desk. Margaret clasped her hands together tightly as she began. "Jonathan, it's about the Lake Harmony villa." "Emily, she's trying to take it from me." Jonathan's brows furrowed. "On what grounds?" "She says I'm too old to need it, that David's parents will take better care of it. She's making arrangements as if it already belongs to them." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "Have you signed anything recently? Any transfer documents, power of attorney, anything that could be interpreted as giving her control?" Margaret shook her head. "No, I haven't signed anything, but I wouldn't put it past her to try something. She's determined." Jonathan's voice grew more serious. "If she's that determined, Margaret, we need to be careful. In cases like this, it's not uncommon for someone to try less legal methods. Forged signatures, false claims of ownership. It happens more often than you'd think." Margaret felt a chill run down her spine. "You think she might try to forge my signature?" Jonathan didn't answer right away. He adjusted his glasses and looked her in the eye. "I think if she's convinced she's entitled to the villa, she might justify anything in her mind to get it. We can't take that chance." Margaret's pulse quickened. For a moment, anger surged again, hot and sharp. But she forced herself to take a slow breath. Jonathan was right. Losing her temper wouldn't help. "What do you suggest?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. Jonathan pulled a folder from his desk drawer and opened it. "First, we secure all your original documents. The deed, the purchase agreement, anything related to the villa's ownership. Keep them in a safe place, preferably somewhere Emily doesn't know about." Margaret nodded slowly. "Second, Jonathan continued. We can add legal safeguards, additional verification requirements for any property transfers. That way, even if someone tried to submit forged documents, they'd be rejected without the proper verification. Margaret absorbed his words, each step sounding like a lifeline she hadn't realized she needed. And third, Jonathan said, his tone softening slightly, we keep this quiet. If Emily suspects you're taking steps to protect yourself, she might accelerate whatever she's planning. It's better if she believes nothing has changed. Margaret leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface. But now it had a shape, a direction. You're right, she said finally. No confrontation. Not yet. Jonathan gave a small, approving nod. Good. Let her think she's ahead. The element of surprise is your advantage here. Margaret rose to her feet, shaking Jonathan's hand firmly. Thank you, Jonathan. I'll bring the documents to you tomorrow. As she left his office, the tension in her chest eased ever so slightly. For the first time since Emily's call, she felt like she had a foothold. She wasn't just reacting anymore. She was planning. Walking back to her car, Margaret's expression hardened. Emily believed she was playing a clever game. She believed her mother was too gentle, too old, too sentimental to fight back. Margaret almost smiled at the thought. Let her think that. That evening, after returning from Jonathan's office, Margaret walked out onto her porch and stared down the quiet suburban street. Her mind was still sharp despite her age, and she knew that legal safeguards alone might not be enough. Emily was stubborn, David was opportunistic, and Linda had always struck her as someone who played polite but calculated games. Margaret's eyes settled on the house 2 doors down, Tom Parker's place. Tom was in his early 40s, a quiet man with a tidy lawn, a garage full of tools, and a reputation for fixing just about anything. Over the years, he had helped Margaret with the occasional repair at the villa, installing a new thermostat, upgrading the Wi-Fi. She hesitated for just a moment before grabbing her coat. If she was going to protect her home, she needed more than a lawyer. She needed a shield no one could bypass. Tom answered his door wearing a faded t-shirt and jeans, a smudge of grease on his forearm. His eyes lit up with polite surprise. "Margaret, what brings you by?" Margaret offered a small smile. "Tom, I need your expertise. It's about the villa." Tom's brow furrowed. "Something broken?" "Not exactly," Margaret said, stepping into his workshop-like living room. She glanced around at the shelves lined with gadgets, spare parts, and the occasional half-assembled drone. "I need a security system, one that no one, and I mean no one, can disable." Tom leaned against a workbench, curious. "That's a tall order. What's going on?" Margaret hesitated, then decided there was no point in being vague. "My daughter is trying to take the villa, and her in-laws, they'll be moving in soon if I don't stop it. I need the place secure before that happens." Tom's expression darkened in a way that surprised her. He set down the wrench he'd been holding. "Her in-laws? You mean Linda and Robert?" Margaret nodded cautiously. A bitter laugh escaped Tom. "Well, isn't that interesting?" Margaret tilted her head. "Why?" Tom walked over to a drawer and pulled out a faded file folder. "Linda was part of a property scheme about 8 years ago. My aunt was swindled out of her retirement condo. Linda's name wasn't on the paperwork, but she was involved. I couldn't prove anything. My aunt lost everything." Margaret's eyes widened. "I had no idea." Tom's jaw tightened. "Let's just say, I don't mind the idea of making her life a little more complicated." For the first time all day, Margaret allowed herself a genuine smile. "So you'll help me?" Tom grinned, but there was steel in his expression. "Not just help you. We'll make sure that villa is a fortress. If they set foot inside, they'll wish they hadn't." The next morning, they loaded Tom's truck with equipment, motion sensors, smart locks, voice-activated systems, programmable lighting, and more devices Margaret didn't even recognize. The back seat was stacked with boxes, each one a piece of the puzzle. They drove up to Lake Harmony under the cover of a weekday morning, when the road was quiet and the villa was empty. Margaret unlocked the front door and stepped inside, inhaling the familiar scent of cedar and lake air. "This place is beautiful," Tom said, setting down a toolbox. "We're going to keep it that way, just with a few surprises." They started in the entryway. Tom installed a smart lock that required a unique passcode, facial recognition, and remote access from Margaret's phone. "Even if someone changes the code, they can't get in without your face or my override," Tom explained. In the living room, he placed discrete motion sensors near the ceiling corners. These will trigger different responses: lights, sound, even the water system. Think of it as interactive deterrence. Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Interactive deterrence?" Tom grinned. "Trust me, when they hear voices telling them to leave, they'll think twice about staying." They worked room by room. Programmable LED lights in the hallway, a voice assistant in the kitchen set to respond to unauthorized presence, and hidden cameras with a secure feed directly to Margaret's phone and Tom's secure server. As they moved to the upstairs hallway, Tom installed a particularly advanced piece of equipment above the guest room door. "This one's my favorite," he said. "Motion here will trigger a sequence. Lights flicker, doors lock for 30 seconds, faucets turn on. Just enough to make people panic without causing real damage." Margaret couldn't help but chuckle. "You've done this before." "Let's just say I've had some practice." By late afternoon, the villa had transformed. On the surface, it looked exactly the same. Warm, inviting, perfectly maintained. But beneath that familiar surface was a web of technology, ready to spring to life at the first sign of unwelcome guests. Tom did a final walkthrough, tablet in hand, testing each system. Lights pulsed briefly, the voice assistant calmly announced security warnings, water taps opened and shut with precise timing. Everything worked perfectly. Standing on the terrace, Margaret looked out over Lake Harmony, the sunlight dancing on the water. For the first time since Emily's betrayal, she felt a sense of control returning. Tom joined her, setting down his tablet. They'll never see it coming. Margaret's lips curved into a quiet, satisfied smile. "Good. Let them think they've won. We'll be ready." Margaret didn't have to wait long for the next move. Just 3 days after her trip to the villa with Tom, her phone rang. Emily's name appeared on the screen again. Her daughter's voice was casual, even cheerful, when Margaret picked up. "Mom, just letting you know. David's parents are coming to stay at the villa this weekend. We're helping them move in. It'll be so much easier for them, you know? Closer to nature, better space than their apartment." Margaret's fingers tightened around the phone. Every instinct screamed to push back, to remind Emily that the villa wasn't hers to give away. But she took a slow breath and kept her voice calm. "That's nice, dear. I hope they enjoy their stay." Emily hesitated, perhaps expecting an argument. When none came, she recovered quickly. "Right. Well, thanks, Mom. We'll take care of everything. You don't have to worry about a thing." Margaret smiled faintly to herself as she ended the call. "No, Emily, you don't have to worry. I've already taken care of everything." Saturday morning arrived crisp and bright at Lake Harmony. On the villa's security feed, Margaret watched from her living room in San Francisco as a dark SUV rolled up the gravel driveway. The cameras Tom had installed caught every angle. The car doors opening, voices carrying on the wind. Linda emerged first, her carefully styled hair and pearl necklace glinting in the sun. Robert followed, carrying 2 large suitcases. David stepped out from the driver's side, phone already in hand, giving instructions to a pair of movers who had arrived in a separate truck. Emily was there too, wearing sunglasses and a satisfied smile, like a queen overseeing her new estate. Through the camera's microphone, Margaret could hear snippets of conversation as they unloaded boxes. "Oh, Linda, just wait until you see the view from the master bedroom," Emily said. "You'll love it here." Linda laughed, the sound dripping with entitlement. "It's just perfect. We can redecorate this place, make it more modern. Those curtains have to go." Margaret's lips tightened. Those curtains had been chosen by her and her husband during a trip to Italy years ago. She remembered the store, the laughter they shared while picking them out. Robert joined in, his voice booming. We'll need a bigger dining table if we plan on hosting. I can get a good deal on one. I know a guy." Margaret could feel the anger rising in her chest. On screen, they moved through the front door as if they owned the place, their belongings spilling into the hallway. Emily trailed behind them, giving more instructions. "Oh, and the guest room. David's thinking of turning it into an office. He'll be working from here most days. We might need to repaint the walls." David nodded absently, already opening drawers in the kitchen. "We'll need to upgrade the appliances, too. These are dated." Margaret nearly laughed out loud. Dated? Those appliances were top of the line less than 2 years ago. But she stayed silent, watching every detail. The camera in the living room caught Linda walking slowly across the space, her eyes scanning every piece of furniture. "We'll have to get rid of this old couch. It's seen better days. Something more neutral will suit the room." Margaret leaned back in her chair, her fingers drumming against the armrest. The urge to pick up the phone and scream at them was strong, but so was her resolve. This wasn't the moment for confrontation. This was the moment to let them feel comfortable, to let them think they were in control. The movers carried in more boxes, filling the hallway. Emily directed them like a project manager. "That box goes upstairs. Those can stay in the living room for now. Oh, careful with the vase. It's antique." Margaret's jaw tightened again. The vase was hers. Every item in that house was hers. She glanced at the control panel Tom had set up on her phone. Every system was armed and ready. She could trigger the first sequence at any time, but she chose to wait. Let them unpack. Let them feel settled. On the camera feed, David and Robert were now discussing where to place a new television in the living room. Linda was in the kitchen, opening cabinets and rearranging dishes. Emily was upstairs, her voice carrying down the hallway as she called out instructions about linens. They spoke as though they had already lived there for years. Margaret took a deep breath, her anger now tempered by a cool sense of purpose. "Go ahead," she thought. "Make yourselves at home. The villa will take care of the rest." She closed the control panel for now and sat back, watching. This was only the first stage. The real game hadn't even begun. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon when Margaret decided it was time. She had let them unpack, rearrange furniture, and discuss all their renovation plans. Now she wanted them to feel the first ripple of what they had stepped into. With a slow, deliberate motion, she opened the control panel on her phone. All the systems Tom had installed were live, the sensors tracking every movement inside the villa. She didn't press anything, yet. She waited for the perfect moment. On the camera feed, Linda was in the kitchen, arranging glassware. Robert was setting up a small lamp in the living room. David was pacing between rooms, occasionally stepping outside to check on the mover's van. Emily was upstairs, opening drawers in the master bedroom. Margaret tapped the Stage 1 button. The effect was immediate. The hallway lights began to flicker erratically, casting long, jagged shadows against the walls. A low hum filled the air, faint at first, then rising into a strange, vibrating tone that seemed to come from the walls themselves. In the kitchen, Linda froze. "Robert, do you hear that?" Robert frowned, looking up at the ceiling. "Probably just the wiring. Old houses do that sometimes." The hum deepened. A voice, low, mechanical, and oddly calm, echoed through the villa. "Unauthorized presence detected. Please vacate the premises." David's voice shot up an octave above. What the hell was that? Before anyone could answer, every faucet in the house turned on at once. Water gushed into the sinks, tubs, and showers, the sound roaring through the rooms. Linda shrieked, "Robert, the kitchen!" She ran to the sink, fumbling with the handle, but no matter how she twisted it, the water kept pouring. In the upstairs bedroom, Emily dropped the drawer she was holding and looked around wildly. "David! What's happening?" Margaret leaned back in her chair in San Francisco, her face calm as she watched the chaos unfold. She knew exactly what was happening. Tom's carefully programmed deterrence sequence was working flawlessly. Downstairs, Robert tried the front door. It didn't budge. The smart locks had engaged, holding the door shut for a full 30 seconds. "This door won't open," Robert shouted, jiggling the handle. From the walls, the calm voice repeated, "Please vacate the premises immediately. This property is secured." David was pale now. "Emily, get your phone. Call someone, call Mom." Emily pulled out her phone, but her signal dropped to 0 bars. Tom had warned Margaret that the reinforced system could temporarily block reception in certain areas. Then the lights changed again. Instead of flickering, they shifted into an odd pattern, flashes of white and red, as though mimicking a security alarm. The shadows on the walls seemed to move, elongated figures that twisted and bent unnaturally. Linda screamed again, "This place is haunted! We need to get out!" Robert slammed his shoulder against the front door just as the locks disengaged. The door flew open, and a rush of cool night air swept into the villa. No one needed further encouragement. Robert grabbed the nearest bag, Linda clutched her purse, and David herded them out the door. Emily trailed behind, still looking over her shoulder at the darkened hallway. They stumbled down the steps into the driveway, piling into the SUV. The headlights flicked on and the engine roared to life. Within moments, the vehicle sped away, gravel scattering behind them. Margaret watched as the camera feed showed the villa falling silent again. The faucets shut off automatically, the lights returned to their warm glow, and the voice system went quiet. She exhaled slowly. Round 1, complete. But she knew Emily wouldn't give up so easily. Sure enough, the next afternoon, Margaret's phone rang. Emily's voice was tight, but not defeated. "Mom, something weird happened at the villa last night. The lights, the water. I think the wiring's faulty. We'll need to get someone in to fix it." Margaret kept her tone light, even sympathetic. "Oh dear, that sounds inconvenient. Are you sure you and David are comfortable staying there right now?" Emily hesitated, then spoke with forced confidence. "It's just a technical issue. We'll handle it. The villa's too perfect for us to give up on it." After the call ended, Margaret set the phone down and allowed herself a small, knowing smile. Emily still thought she was in control, that this was just a temporary inconvenience. Perfect. Let her think that. The call came earlier than Margaret expected. Emily's number flashed across the screen, and the sharp tone in her daughter's voice was unmistakable, even before she finished saying, "Hello." "Mom," Emily began, skipping any polite greeting. "What exactly did you do to the villa?" Margaret kept her voice soft, almost puzzled. "What do you mean, dear?" "Don't play dumb with me." Emily's voice climbed higher, frustration evident. The lights were flashing, the faucets all turned on by themselves, the doors locked. David's parents are shaken up. This is exactly your style of passive-aggressive revenge. Margaret allowed a small pause, as though genuinely confused. "Emily, that sounds terrible. But the villa has a smart home system. You remember I had Tom updated a while ago. These systems can be temperamental sometimes. It's probably just a glitch." "A glitch?" Emily's voice dripped with disbelief. "That's not a glitch. That was targeted. And it happened the first night we stayed there." Margaret let a faint sigh carry through the line. "Emily, I had no idea you were there. I haven't been to the villa in days. If something malfunctioned, it wasn't because of me, but perhaps we should meet in person to discuss this. It might be easier to clear things up face to face." There was a moment of silence on the other end. Margaret could practically hear Emily weighing her options. Finally, Emily spoke, more controlled now. "Fine, we'll talk. But this is ridiculous." "Of course," Margaret said, her tone warm, even as her eyes narrowed in quiet calculation. "Let me know when you want to meet." After hanging up, she leaned back in her chair. Emily had taken the bait. A direct meeting would give Margaret more time, more opportunities to play her part carefully. Meanwhile, at the villa, David was growing restless. Emily had convinced him the problem was a technical one, a faulty security system that could be fixed. He decided to take matters into his own hands. "Mom's just trying to scare us," David told Emily as he pulled out his phone. "I'll get a locksmith. Once we replace the locks, she won't have any way of interfering." Emily didn't look entirely convinced, but she nodded. "Fine, just get it done." That afternoon, a locksmith's van pulled up to the villa. The technician, a middle-aged man with a tool belt and a confident stride, stepped out and greeted David. "So, what seems to be the problem?" the locksmith asked. David gestured toward the front door. "We just need the locks replaced. There's a smart system, but it's malfunctioning. We want it removed and replaced with something simple, mechanical, old school." The locksmith knelt by the door, examining the hardware. His brow furrowed almost immediately. "This isn't your standard smart lock. It's integrated into a full security suite. Whoever installed this knew exactly what they were doing. There are multiple authentication layers: facial recognition, remote access, and an encrypted backup. Can you bypass it?" David asked, impatience creeping into his tone. The locksmith glanced at him over his shoulder. "Bypass? Not without full access credentials, and even then it would take hours, maybe days, to dismantle without damaging the door." David's frustration grew. "I don't care if you damage the door. Just get the system out." The locksmith hesitated, then shook his head. "Sir, if I force this system, it could trigger automatic security responses. I've seen setups like this lock down entire houses. You'd need the installer or someone with equivalent access to handle it safely." David clenched his fists. "And how do we find this installer?" The locksmith shrugged, already packing up his tools. "Whoever set this up left no identifying information on the hardware. That's unusual." Inside the villa, Emily had been listening. Her confidence wavered as she watched David argue with the locksmith. The idea of her mother quietly orchestrating all of this gnawed at her, even if she refused to admit it out loud. "Forget it," David muttered, slamming the door after the locksmith left. "We'll figure something else out." Emily tried to steady her voice. "Maybe it really is just a glitch. We'll call the system manufacturer, or we'll talk to Mom." David gave her a skeptical look. "If your mom's behind this, talking to her won't change anything. She's not going to hand over the villa." Emily's jaw tightened. "Then we make her." Margaret, miles away, checked her phone. The villa's security logs showed multiple failed attempts to override the system. The cameras caught every moment of David's conversation with the locksmith. She allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The villa was secure. The locks were unbreakable. And now, David and Emily were growing frustrated. Frustration, Margaret knew, could be far more dangerous than anger. It made people reckless, and recklessness was exactly what she needed from them. While David and Emily spent the afternoon pacing through the villa, growing more irritated with each failed attempt to break through the security system, Margaret was sitting comfortably in her living room, phone in hand. She scrolled through her contacts until she found a name she hadn't spoken to in years: Michael Grant. Michael was a real estate investor she'd met at a charity event back when David had been trying to secure business loans for one of his projects. He was well connected, and more importantly, he knew exactly which deals David had tried and failed to pull off. Margaret pressed the call button. "Margaret Wilson!" Michael's voice came through warm, surprised. "It's been ages. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Margaret's tone was casual, almost conversational. "Michael, I was wondering if you've spoken to David Miller recently. He's my son-in-law." Michael gave a short laugh. "Ah, David, always chasing big ideas. No, I haven't spoken to him in a while." "Why do you ask?" Margaret let a thoughtful pause hang in the air. "Oh, no reason. I just heard he was looking to expand. It made me wonder how he's doing with his current obligations." Michael chuckled knowingly. "Current obligations? You mean the loan he still hasn't finished paying off? Or the investors still waiting for returns on that condo flip?" Margaret smiled faintly, though her voice stayed sympathetic. "That's unfortunate. I hope Emily knows about all of that." Michael's laugh stopped abruptly. "Emily? I doubt it. David's good at keeping things quiet, but if she's involved in any property decisions, she should probably know, especially if there are liens attached to anything they own." Margaret leaned back in her chair, her plan clicking neatly into place. "Yes, that's what I was thinking. Well, Michael, it was lovely catching up." After ending the call, she sat back and let the seeds take root. Michael had a habit of sharing information, discreetly, of course, but always to the right ears. And Margaret knew exactly how fast news traveled through David's circle. 2 days later, the tension began to show. From the villa's cameras, Margaret watched as Emily and David argued in the kitchen. Emily's arms were crossed, her voice sharp. "Why didn't you tell me about the debt, David?" David's back stiffened. "It's not a big deal. I've got it under control." "Under control?" Emily's tone was incredulous. "Michael Grant called me yesterday. He hinted there are liens on your properties. And you're trying to move your parents into my mother's villa? Were you planning to tell me any of this?" David's jaw tightened. "This is exactly why I didn't say anything. You overreact. I'm handling it. My parents need a place to live, and the villa is perfect. Once we settle in, everything will stabilize." Emily shook her head, frustration radiating off her. "So the plan is to move your parents into a house we don't even legally own, while you juggle debt you didn't tell me about? Do you have any idea how reckless that sounds?" David stepped closer, lowering his voice but not his temper. "Do you have any idea how much I've done for us? I've been the one taking risks, building opportunities." Emily cut him off. "Risks? Is that what you call putting us in a financial hole? And now my mother's involved. Do you know what she's capable of when she's quiet like this? She's not just going to let this go." David hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "She doesn't have proof. She doesn't even know what we're doing." Emily stared at him, her voice low and sharp. "David, she knows everything. That's what you don't get. And now she probably knows more than I do." Margaret watched all of it from the safety of her living room, her tea growing cold as she listened to their argument through the villa's audio feed. She could hear the cracks forming in their alliance, the sharp edges of distrust cutting deeper with each exchange. She didn't need to say a word. The work was being done for her, from the inside. David left the kitchen, slamming the door behind him, while Emily remained by the counter, scrolling furiously through her phone. Margaret could only guess what she was looking for. Bank records, loan agreements, perhaps a way to confirm what Michael had hinted. It didn't matter. The more Emily questioned David, the more unstable their united front would become. And instability was exactly what Margaret needed. By evening, Emily called her again. Her voice was calmer, but there was a sharpness underneath. "Mom, we need to talk about the villa. I think there are other things going on that you might not be aware of." Margaret let a touch of innocence into her tone. "Oh, what kind of things?" Emily hesitated. "David's been busy. There are financial matters. I'm still trying to sort them out, but I just wanted you to know, if we need to delay the move-in for his parents, that might be best." Margaret's smile didn't reach her voice. "Of course, dear. Whatever you think is best." After the call ended, she set her phone down and allowed herself a quiet, satisfied sigh. The cracks were widening. Emily and David were no longer a single united opponent. Soon they'd be too busy fighting each other to see what was coming next. Margaret drove into the city under a slate-gray sky, her fingers tightening around the steering wheel as she navigated the morning traffic. The call from Emily the night before had confirmed what she already knew. The cracks between Emily and David were growing, but cracks were not enough. She needed a permanent solution, something that would eliminate the villa as a bargaining chip forever. When she reached Jonathan Lee's office, he was already waiting for her. His calm, professional demeanor was the same as always, but his sharp eyes missed nothing. As soon as they shook hands, he gestured for her to sit. "I take it this is about the villa again," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. Margaret gave a dry smile. "You could say that. I've decided I don't want it to be a problem anymore. Not for Emily, not for David, not for anyone." Jonathan studied her for a moment. "And how do you plan to make that happen?" Margaret slid a folder across the desk. Inside were documents she had spent the past week gathering: the villa's deed, updated appraisals, tax records. "I want to transfer ownership permanently to the Second Horizon Foundation." Jonathan's brow furrowed. "The charity for housing initiatives?" Margaret nodded. They've done good work for years, and they're structured in a way that allows for special donor agreements. I want the villa transferred to them with one condition. I retain lifetime usage rights. I'll still be able to visit, maintain it, enjoy it. But Emily and David? They'll have no legal claim, now or ever. Jonathan sat forward, steepling his fingers. That's a bold move. It's the only move, Margaret said simply. Emily won't stop pushing. David won't stop scheming. I need to take the board off the table. Jonathan flipped through the documents, his lawyer's mind already scanning for potential complications. You understand that once the transfer is complete, it can't be reversed. Not even you could take it back. The foundation will own the property outright. Your usage rights will be protected by the agreement, but ownership will be gone. Margaret's voice was steady. That's exactly what I want. No loopholes, no back doors. The villa will be untouchable. Jonathan exhaled slowly, as though weighing the gravity of the decision. I can draft the paperwork today, but Margaret, once Emily finds out, this will end any legal discussion. She'll have no standing in court, and she will know that you made this choice deliberately. Are you prepared for that fallout? Margaret's eyes hardened. Jonathan, my daughter already decided I was expendable the moment she tried to hand my home to her in-laws. I'm prepared for her anger. I'm not prepared to watch her dismantle everything I built with my husband. Jonathan gave a slow nod. Very well. Let's make it official. They spent the next 2 hours reviewing the necessary forms. Jonathan moved with the efficiency of someone who had handled dozens of property transfers. But even he seemed impressed by the thoroughness of Margaret's plan. The agreement with the Second Horizon Foundation was airtight. The villa would be donated as a charitable asset, exempt from personal claims or inheritance disputes. Margaret's lifetime usage rights were detailed down to the letter, guaranteeing her uninterrupted access. Once the paperwork was finalized, Jonathan slid the final page across the desk. This is it, he said quietly. Once you sign, the villa will no longer be yours in name, but it will be safe forever. Margaret picked up the pen. Her hand didn't shake. In a clear, deliberate motion, she signed her name. Jonathan Encounter signed as a witness, then placed the completed documents into a folder marked Finalized. He looked at her with something like respect. I have to say, Margaret, this is one of the cleanest preemptive moves I've ever seen. Once this is filed, Emily will have nothing, not even a chance to contest it. Margaret allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. That's the point. She's been playing checkers. I've been playing chess. Later that afternoon, Jonathan placed a call to the foundation to arrange the formal transfer. Margaret listened quietly as he explained the terms, his tone calm and precise. When the call ended, he looked up at her. It's done. As of Monday, the Second Horizon Foundation will be the legal owner of the Lake Harmony Villa. You'll retain full usage rights until your death. After that, the foundation can use it for their programs. Margaret nodded, relief settling over her like a warm blanket. Thank you, Jonathan. Jonathan leaned back, studying her carefully. Margaret, you know this won't stop Emily from trying to provoke you in other ways. This will just remove her favorite weapon. Margaret gave a faint smile. I don't care if she's angry. I care that she can't touch the villa. Everything else, I can handle. Driving home, Margaret felt lighter than she had in months. The sky had cleared, the late afternoon sun casting a golden glow over the city skyline. For the first time since Emily's betrayal began, Margaret felt not just defensive, but victorious. Her phone buzzed in her purse, a text from Jonathan. All documents filed. Confirmation will arrive Monday morning. The villa is secure. Margaret set the phone down, her lips curling into a quiet smile. Emily had no idea what was waiting for her. Back at the villa, the security cameras caught Emily walking through the rooms with David and Linda, pointing at walls, discussing furniture, making plans as though the house was already theirs. Margaret watched from her living room. Enjoy it while you can, she thought. In a few days, you won't even be able to argue about it. She poured herself a glass of wine, sitting by the window as the sun dipped below the horizon. The decision was final. The villa was beyond Emily's reach, beyond David's ambition, beyond Linda's schemes. For the first time in weeks, Margaret allowed herself to feel the weight lift from her shoulders. It didn't take long for the storm to arrive. 2 days after the paperwork was finalized, the sound of tires screeching outside Margaret's home broke the late morning calm. She looked out the window to see Emily's car in the driveway. David was with her, his expression set and stormy. The pounding on the front door came seconds later. Margaret took her time answering. She opened the door to find Emily standing rigid, her eyes flashing. David stood behind her, arms crossed, jaw tight. "We need to talk," Emily said sharply, pushing past her mother into the living room without waiting for an invitation. Margaret shut the door slowly, her movements calm. "Of course. What's this about?" Emily spun around. "Don't play games, Mom. We know what you're doing. You're trying to keep us out of the villa. That place is supposed to be for David's parents. You can't just—" "I can't just— what?" Margaret asked mildly, walking to the armchair and sitting down. "Emily, the villa is my property. I can decide what to do with it." David stepped forward, his voice low and threatening. "If you don't hand it over, we'll take this to court. You've been harassing us, interfering with our right to use the property. We can make a case." Margaret tilted her head slightly, as though studying a curious animal. "Oh, you're going to court? And on what grounds exactly?" Emily hesitated. "On the grounds that—" She stopped, her jaw tightened. "On the grounds that you're deliberately blocking us from a property that's supposed to be ours." Margaret allowed herself a small smile. "Ah, well, that's the interesting part. You see, Emily, the villa isn't mine anymore." Both Emily and David froze. David's brows drew together. "What are you talking about?" Margaret leaned back comfortably in her chair. "I transferred ownership. As of this week, the Lake Harmony Villa belongs to the Second Horizon Foundation. I retain lifetime usage rights, of course. But as for ownership, that belongs to the charity now, legally, permanently." Emily blinked as though she hadn't heard correctly. "You— what?" Margaret repeated it, her tone calm and deliberate. "The villa is owned by the foundation. You can't sue me for it, you can't transfer it, you can't even put a lien on it. It's untouchable." David's face darkened. "That's impossible. You can't just sign it away like that." Margaret smiled faintly. "I can. And I did. My lawyer has already filed the documents. You're welcome to check the public records." Emily's face was pale now, her voice shaky. "But the plans, David's parents, we—" Margaret cut her off gently. "Those plans were made without my input, without my permission, and now they're irrelevant. The villa isn't something you can use to solve your problems anymore." David's eyes narrowed. "This is because of the debt, isn't it? Michael Grant told you—" Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Debt? Oh, I didn't need Michael to tell me anything. I know enough to protect myself." Emily turned on David, her voice sharp. "I told you this would come back to haunt us." David shot her a look. "Don't start this here." Margaret sat back, watching the cracks widen between them. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "You see, Emily, this is what happens when you assume control over things that aren't yours. The villa was never yours to give, and now it's beyond your reach forever." Emily's composure crumbled. Her voice broke, a mix of anger and disbelief. "You've destroyed everything. Do you understand that? Everything we planned—" Margaret's voice remained even. "I destroyed nothing. I protected what was mine. You destroyed your own plans by building them on something you didn't own." The room went silent except for the sound of Emily's breathing, sharp and uneven. David's face was a mask of frustration, but he said nothing. Emily's voice came out barely above a whisper now. "There's nothing we can do, is there?" Margaret's tone softened, but there was steel beneath it. "No, Emily, there's nothing you can do. The villa is no longer part of this conversation. Whatever else you and David need to figure out, you'll have to do it without my home involved." Emily looked at her mother for a long moment, her eyes full of a complicated mix of anger, betrayal, and something else, something like reluctant understanding. Then she turned sharply on her heel and walked to the door. David followed without another word. The front door closed with a definitive click. Margaret sat in the quiet living room for a moment, exhaling slowly. It was done. The villa was beyond their reach, beyond their control. For the first time, Emily had nothing to leverage, nothing to threaten. And for the first time, Margaret felt the deep satisfaction of a battle won not through anger, but through patience and strategy. The sound of Emily's car fading down the street left a silence in Margaret's house so complete it almost rang in her ears. She stood in the middle of her living room for a long moment, letting the quiet settle around her. There had been shouting, accusations, threats, and then, at last, the final crack as Emily's voice broke and her certainty crumbled. Margaret hadn't raised her voice once. She didn't need to. The documents had spoken for themselves. Now the battle was over. She walked to the window and watched as a small gust of wind stirred the branches outside. Emily and David were gone, not just from her driveway, but from the fight they had brought to her doorstep. The bond between mother and daughter felt fractured beyond repair, and yet Margaret didn't feel the vindictive thrill she thought might come with such a victory. She felt tired, relieved, and beneath it all, a sense of quiet that had been missing for years. 2 days later, she packed a small overnight bag, slid the keys to the villa into her purse, and began the familiar drive to Lake Harmony. The winding road looked the same as it always had, lined with tall pines and wildflowers just starting to bloom. The lake shimmered in the distance, calm and blue, as though untouched by the storms of recent weeks. When she pulled into the driveway, the sight of the villa brought a rush of emotions. It stood as it always had, sturdy, serene, and timeless. But now there was no shadow of a coming confrontation, no fear that she might open the door to find someone else inside. The villa was safe. Margaret unlocked the door and stepped inside. The familiar scent of cedar greeted her. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the dust motes in the air. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to simply stand there and breathe it in. Then she got to work. She moved room to room, not with the frantic energy of defense, but with the deliberate calm of restoration. In the entryway, she opened the control panel Tom had installed months before. The intricate network of locks, sensors, and automated triggers that had served her so well now blinked quietly on standby. Margaret touched the screen, deactivating the sequences one by one. The voice warnings, the flickering lights, the water systems, all were turned off. The systems had done their job. The villa didn't need to be a fortress anymore. She went upstairs, checking the guest rooms. Each one was neat, undisturbed. She remembered the night Linda and Robert had fled in panic, convinced the house was haunted. The memory brought a small, wry smile to her lips. In the master bedroom, she paused by the window, looking out at the lake. This room had been her retreat for years, a place of memories with her late husband. It had been invaded, yes, but it had also been reclaimed. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment, letting the sunlight warm her hands. For weeks, every thought about the villa had been tied to conflict, strategy, defense. Now, for the first time in months, she could simply see it for what it was, a place she loved. In the kitchen, she made tea. The sound of water boiling, the gentle clink of the teacup, the steam rising. It all felt like part of a quiet ritual she hadn't realized she'd missed. She carried the cup out to the terrace and sat down in her favorite chair. From here, she could see the full sweep of Lake Harmony, the surface shimmering like glass. A pair of ducks skimmed the water near the far shore. Somewhere in the trees, a bird called. She sipped her tea and let herself relax into the moment. Emily's voice still echoed faintly in her mind, sharp with accusation, trembling with frustration. But here, by the lake, those echoes felt distant. The anger had burned out. Margaret thought of her daughter, not the woman who had stood in her living room 2 days ago, but the girl she'd raised, the child who had needed her comfort after a bad dream, the teenager who had rolled her eyes at advice but still asked for help when things got hard. That daughter felt far away now, hidden beneath years of entitlement and unspoken resentment. Margaret didn't know if the relationship could ever be repaired, but she knew one thing. She would no longer let her love for Emily be a weapon turned against her. As the sun moved lower in the sky, Margaret stood and walked back inside. She checked the security panel one last time. The advanced systems were still there if she needed them, but for now, the villa would return to its natural state, peaceful, welcoming hers. She opened the windows, letting in the fresh scent of pine and lake water. The breeze rustled the curtains, carrying away the last traces of tension. For the first time in months, there was nothing to guard against. No battles to plan, no defenses to prepare. The villa was quiet, and so was her heart. That night, she sat by the fireplace with a book she'd been meaning to read for years. The flames crackled softly, filling the room with warmth. She didn't glance at her phone once. Outside, the lake lay still under the moonlight. Inside, the woman who had fought and won without raising her voice allowed herself to rest. The first light of dawn painted lake harmony in soft shades of gold and pale rose. Margaret sat on the terrace, a blanket wrapped loosely around her shoulders. A warm mug of tea cradled in her hands. The air was cool and still, carrying the scent of pine and fresh water. She had woken before sunrise, not out of restlessness, but out of a quiet anticipation she hadn't felt in years. The villa was silent. There were no voices raised in argument, no hurried footsteps claiming rooms that weren't theirs. Only the steady, peaceful rhythm of a home returned to its rightful balance. As the sun broke the horizon, she let herself breathe deeply, savoring the moment. Her thoughts drifted, as they often did, to the idea of victory. For weeks, the word had meant defense, keeping what was hers, holding her ground against Emily and David. But here, in the pale morning light, she realized that victory wasn't just about what she had kept. It was about what she had reclaimed. Her boundaries, her self-respect, the quiet certainty that she could care for herself without bending to manipulation. The villa was safe, yes, but more importantly, so was her sense of self. Margaret traced the rim of her mug slowly, her gaze fixed on the lake. For years after her husband's passing, she had feared saying no to Emily, afraid it might create distance between them. She had given and given, thinking it was love, only to realize that love without boundaries turns into something fragile, something that can be broken and used. Now she understood that boundaries were not walls meant to shut people out. They were fences that protected the garden within. She smiled faintly at the thought. The sun climbed higher, casting diamonds of light across the water. Margaret's tea had cooled, but she didn't mind. She was lost in the slow, steady unfolding of the day. She thought of Emily again, but without the tightness in her chest that had accompanied those thoughts in recent weeks. There was sadness, yes, a deep ache for what their relationship could have been. But there was also acceptance. Emily's anger, her disappointment, her accusations, those belonged to Emily now. Margaret had let them go, just as she had let go of the idea that keeping the peace meant sacrificing herself. The villa was proof that she could stand firm, and the sunrise was proof that she could move forward without bitterness. She stood and walked down to the edge of the lake, her slippers brushing against the dew-covered grass. The surface of the water was glassy, reflecting the tall pines and the pale morning sky. She remembered walking the same path with her husband years ago, his hand warm in hers, their conversation light and unhurried. For a moment, she closed her eyes and let the memory settle over her like sunlight. "I think you'd be proud of me," she murmured softly. There was no answer, of course, only the gentle lapping of the water against the shore. But in her heart, she felt a quiet affirmation. By mid-morning, Margaret was back on the terrace, a fresh cup of tea beside her, her journal open on the table. She began to write, not about the conflict or the villa or even Emily, but about herself. She wrote about the way the sunrise looked over Lake Harmony, the sound of the wind in the pines, the relief of knowing she had acted not out of vengeance, but out of a deep respect for her own worth. Her handwriting was slow, deliberate. Each word felt like a stone laid carefully in the foundation of a life she was rebuilding, one rooted in peace, not fear. As the day warmed, She set her pen down and looked out over the lake one last time. This was the end of one story, yes. The battles were over, the threats gone. But it was also the beginning of another story, one that belonged entirely to her. Margaret stood, gathering her blanket around her shoulders as she stepped back inside. The villa welcomed her with its familiar stillness, and for the first time in years, she felt not just safe, but whole. The fight for the villa had been about more than property. It had been about reclaiming her boundaries, her dignity, and her peace of mind. And now, as the days stretched ahead of her, she knew she had all three. Outside, the lake shimmered under the midday sun, and inside, Margaret moved quietly through her home, her steps light, her heart unburdened. The story had reached its final chapter, not with bitterness, but with the soft, certain closing of a door.